Send her back, she's too skinny, the rancher sneered as the train hissed and the townsfolk stared. The crowd laughed at the trembling bride, cast aside like worthless cargo. But then, boots thundered on the wooden platform. A mountain man, scarred by loss yet unbroken, stepped forward. In front of everyone, he growled one thing that silenced the town. "I'll marry her tonight." That night, under the church bell's echo, vows were spoken by lamplight, but whispers rose darker than the storm clouds. This wasn't just a marriage. Hidden beneath the snow and pine was a secret worth more than gold, a spring of water that greedy hands would kill to control. Now she faces jail keys and the threat of deportation, while he must fight not with bullets but with truth. A woman the world called too weak to live, maybe the only one strong enough to save them all. Will their vow survive betrayal, corruption, and a rancher's wrath, or be torn apart forever? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty train platform as Anya O'Rourke stepped down from the passenger car. Her worn leather shoes touched Colorado soil for the first time, and she clutched her carpet bag close as if it could shield her from the dozens of curious eyes fixed upon her thin frame. The station bustled with activity. Ranchers in dusty boots discussing cattle prices, wives in calico dresses fanning themselves against the heat, and townspeople gathering to see who might step off the train. The air smelled of coal smoke and sun-baked timber, mixed with the sharp scent of sage carried on the wind. Anya's heart hammered against her ribs as she searched the crowd for Henry Kincaid, the wealthy rancher who had answered her advertisement in the Marriage Gazette. Her letters from Ireland had painted a picture of a strong worker, skilled in household management and herb lore, but she knew her gaunt appearance told a different story. She spotted him easily enough, a tall man in an expensive black coat, his silver hair gleaming beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Henry Kincaid stood apart from the others, his bearing that of a man used to command. But as his cold gray eyes swept over her, Anya's hope withered like spring flowers in an early frost. "This slip of a girl?" Kincaid's voice carried across the platform, sharp with contempt. "I sent for a wife, not a half-starved waif." He turned to address the gathering crowd. "Look at her, thin as a rail. She'd never survive the work of a ranch, let alone bear healthy children." Heat flooded Anya's cheeks as whispers rippled through the onlookers. She forced herself to stand straight, though her legs trembled beneath her plain brown skirt. The shame of public rejection burned worse than any hunger she'd known in Ireland. "Send her back on the evening train," Kincaid announced, already turning away. "I won't waste good money on damaged goods." Anya blinked hard against the sting of tears. She'd used the last of her family's savings to make this journey, dreaming of a new life in America. Now those dreams lay shattered at her feet like broken china. The crowd's murmuring grew louder, a mix of pity and morbid fascination. Anya gripped her carpetbag tighter, wondering if she could slip away before her legs gave out entirely. But before she could move, the crowd parted like water around a stone. A tall figure pushed through, broad-shouldered and commanding in his own quiet way. Unlike Kincaid's polished appearance, this man wore buckskins and a weather-beaten coat. His dark beard was shot through with silver, and his eyes, when they met Anya's, held neither pity nor scorn, only steady purpose. "I'll marry her." The words came out low and gruff, but they carried across the suddenly silent platform. Anya's breath caught in her throat. She knew of Lucas Boone by reputation, a mountain man who traded furs in town but otherwise kept to himself. Some said he'd once had a family, but grief had driven him to a solitary life in the high country. "Tonight," Lucas continued, his gaze never leaving Anya's face. "Preacher Johnson can perform the ceremony at sunset." The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Preacher Johnson, a thin man in a black coat, stepped forward with hands raised. "Now, Brother Boone, marriage is a sacred institution. Perhaps we should take some time to—" "She needs a home," Lucas cut in, his voice firm but not unkind. "I've got one to offer. Tonight." The preacher hesitated, looking between Lucas's determined expression and Anya's stunned face. "Miss O'Rourke," he said gently, "do you accept this proposal?" Anya's mind whirled like autumn leaves in a storm. This wasn't the marriage she'd planned, but neither was public humiliation and destitution. She studied Lucas Boone's weathered face, searching for any sign of mockery or cruel intent. She found none, only a quiet strength that seemed to reach out like a steady hand in troubled waters. "I do," she whispered, then cleared her throat and spoke louder. "Yes, I accept." The afternoon passed in a blur. Kind-hearted women from the town, perhaps seeking to make amends for their earlier silence, helped Anya prepare in the back room of the church. They brushed her long auburn hair until it shone and pinned it back with a borrowed blue ribbon. Her plain traveling dress would have to serve as a wedding gown, but someone pressed a small bouquet of late wildflowers into her hands. As evening approached, lamplight began to flicker through the windows of the white-clapboard church. Word had spread quickly through the small town, and curious faces filled the pews. Anya stood in the shadow of the vestibule, her heart fluttering like a caught bird. Was she trading one disaster for another? The church door opened and Lucas stepped inside. He'd cleaned up, though he still wore his frontier clothes rather than formal attire. His dark hair was combed and his beard trimmed. When he saw Anya, something softened in his expression. Not quite a smile, but a gentling around the eyes that eased some of her fear. Preacher Johnson took his place at the altar as the last rays of sunset painted the windows in shades of amber and rose. The ceremony was brief and solemn, with only the essential words of the marriage service. Lucas's voice remained steady as he spoke his vows, and Anya managed to keep her own voice from trembling as she repeated the sacred promises. When Lucas slipped a plain gold band onto her finger, where he'd gotten it on such short notice she couldn't guess, the metal felt warm against her skin. Their hands touched briefly, and she noted the strength in his calloused fingers, so different from her own slender ones. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Preacher Johnson declared, closing his Bible with a soft thump. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The words echoed in the sudden quiet of the church. Anya stood beside Lucas, now his wife, still trying to grasp the swift turn her life had taken. That morning, she'd been a hopeful bride-to-be, then a rejected immigrant, and now she was married to a man she'd known for less than half a day. Lucas offered his arm, and Anya took it, feeling the solid muscle beneath his coat sleeve. Together, they walked down the short aisle, past the watching faces of townspeople who had witnessed both her humiliation and her unexpected salvation. Some nodded in approval, others whispered behind their hands, but Anya kept her chin up, drawing strength from her new husband's steady presence. Outside, the evening air had cooled and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. A horse and wagon waited at the church steps. Lucas's transport, Anya assumed, to whatever home awaited her in the mountains. She glanced up at his profile, strong and inscrutable in the gathering dusk, wondering what sort of life she'd agreed to share. As if sensing her uncertainty, Lucas paused at the wagon and turned to face her. His voice, when he spoke, was low enough that only she could hear. "I ain't much for pretty words, Mrs. Boone, but you have my protection and my respect. That's a solemn promise." Anya nodded, something tight in her chest easing slightly at his words. "Thank you, Mr. Boone," she whispered back. "For everything." He helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hands gentle but sure. As he climbed up beside her and took the reins, Anya sat straight and proud, no longer the rejected bride, but Lucas Boone's wife. Whatever tomorrow might bring, she'd survived this day's trials with her dignity intact, thanks to the unexpected kindness of a stranger who was now her husband. The boarding house dining room buzzed with whispered conversations as Lucas held the door for Anya. Oil lamps cast a warm glow over the wooden tables, where local families gathered for their evening meal. The chatter dimmed noticeably as heads turned to study the newly married couple. Anya kept her eyes lowered, feeling the weight of curious stares. Her wedding ring felt strange and unfamiliar on her finger, as she clasped her hands together to still their trembling. Lucas guided her to a corner table, pulling out a chair with surprising gentleness for such large hands. "2 bowls of stew," he told the approaching waitress, his deep voice quiet, but carrying in the hushed room. "And some fresh bread if you've got it." The aroma of beef and vegetables filled Anya's nose as steaming bowls were placed before them. Her stomach cramped with hunger. She hadn't eaten since early morning on the train. But her hands shook so badly she could barely hold her spoon. Lucas ate steadily, his movements economical and controlled. He didn't try to make conversation, which Anya found oddly comforting. The silence between them felt less awkward than forced small talk might have been. From a nearby table, female voices carried clearly in the quiet room. "Poor man doesn't know what he's gotten himself into," one woman murmured. "That scrawny thing won't last a week in the mountains." "Probably never done a day's real work in her life," another added. "She'll run back to town crying before the month is out." Heat crept up Anya's neck and her throat grew tight. The stew's rich taste turned to ashes in her mouth. She set down her spoon, unable to eat another bite despite her hunger. Lucas's jaw tightened as he glanced at the whispering women. Without a word, he stood and pulled out Anya's chair. "Time we got some rest," he said, loud enough to carry. "We've got an early start tomorrow." Anya rose gratefully, thankful to escape the hostile stares and cutting remarks. Lucas's hand settled briefly on her lower back as he guided her toward the stairs, warm and steady through the thin fabric of her dress. The touch surprised her. He'd barely made contact during their hasty ceremony. The rented room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and single window looking out onto the darkened street. A coal oil lamp cast dancing shadows on the whitewashed walls. Lucas set it carefully on the bedside table, then shrugged out of his coat. "Take the bed," he said, draping the coat over her shoulders. "I'll sleep fine on the floor." Anya clutched the worn leather closer, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and pine needles. In the lamplight, she studied her new husband's face. Weather-lined and tanned from outdoor life, it was neither handsome nor ugly, simply strong, like the rest of him. His dark eyes met hers steadily, but she couldn't read the emotions behind them. Could she trust this stranger who'd married her out of what seemed to be pure kindness? She'd heard stories of mountain men gone wild from solitude, of women who disappeared into the wilderness never to be seen again. But something in Lucas's careful movements, the gentle way he'd sheltered her from the townsfolk's cruelty, made her want to believe in him. "Thank you," she said softly, touching the coat's collar, "for everything today. I know you had no obligation to help me." Lucas shook his head. "No one deserves to be treated like that," he answered gruffly. "Least of all someone who's come so far seeking a better life." He pulled a rough wool blanket from his pack and spread it on the floor. "Get some sleep." The trail home is long. Anya slipped off her boots but kept her dress on, lying down fully clothed atop the bed's patchwork quilt. Lucas's coat made a warm, extra layer as she pulled it close around her shoulders. The lamp's flame dimmed and went out, leaving only faint moonlight filtering through the window. In the darkness, she could hear Lucas's steady breathing from his place on the floor. The strange day's events whirled through her mind. The crushing rejection, the unexpected proposal, the hasty wedding. Exhaustion eventually pulled her under and she drifted into uneasy dreams of mountain paths and unknown destinations. The rumble of wagon wheels on the street below woke her just before dawn. Pale gray light seeped around the edges of the window shade. Lucas was already up, splashing water on his face at the washstand. He knocked gently on the wooden surface. Best get ready," he said. "I've got horses waiting at the livery stable." "Do you ride?" "A little," Anya admitted, sitting up and smoothing her rumpled skirt. "But not often, and never alone." Lucas nodded. "I brought a gentle mare for you. She'll follow my horse's lead." He gathered his few belongings efficiently. "I'll wait downstairs while you wash up." Anya moved quickly through her morning ablutions, using the cool water to wash away the last traces of sleep. Her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand showed pale skin and tired eyes, but she lifted her chin determinedly. Whatever this day might bring, she would face it with courage. Outside, the autumn morning air held a crisp bite. Their breath made small clouds in the early light as Lucas led the way to the stable. True to his word, he'd prepared 2 horses, his own sturdy mountain pony and a smaller chestnut mare with a white star on her forehead. "This is Belle," Lucas said, helping Anya secure her carpet bag behind the saddle. "She's steady and sure-footed. Just keep a light hand on the reins and let her follow my lead." Anya gathered her skirts and put her foot in the stirrup Lucas held for her. With his help, she mounted more smoothly than she'd feared, though her heart beat faster at being so high off the ground. The mare stood quietly, seeming to sense her nervousness. Lucas swung easily into his own saddle, gathering his reins. "Ready?" Anya nodded, not quite trusting her voice. The street was mostly empty as they clattered past the shuttered storefronts and quiet houses. A few early risers paused to watch them pass, the mountain man and his new bride heading out toward the wilderness. The sun was just cresting the horizon as they left the last buildings behind. Ahead, the rutted road wound through golden prairie grass toward the distant mountains. Their peaks rose dark blue against the brightening sky, mysterious and somehow threatening to Anya's lowland-bred eyes. She glanced at Lucas's straight back, wondering what kind of home awaited her in those remote heights. But at least she was moving forward, not backward on the train in defeat. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the same determination that had brought her across an ocean in search of a new life. The mare's steady gait settled into a gentle rhythm beneath her. As the town disappeared behind them, Anya felt something tight in her chest begin to ease. Perhaps this unexpected marriage wasn't the end of her dreams, but rather a different beginning than she'd imagined. The morning sun climbed higher as they followed the winding trail into the foothills. Lucas kept their pace deliberately slow, glancing back often to check on Anya. She gripped the reins tightly, her back straight despite obvious discomfort. "Try to relax your shoulders," Lucas called back. "Move with Belle's rhythm, not against it." Anya nodded, consciously loosening her rigid posture. The mare's steady gait became smoother as she learned to follow its natural motion. Still, every muscle in her legs and back protested the unfamiliar exercise. Lucas seemed to sense her struggle. He led them off the main trail to rest in a small meadow, where late wildflowers dotted the grass with purple and gold. "We'll take it slow," he said, helping her dismount. "No need to rush." Anya's legs trembled as she stood. She pressed a hand against Belle's warm flank to steady herself, grateful when Lucas pretended not to notice her weakness. They continued their journey, climbing steadily higher into the hills. The air grew cooler, and thin wisps of cloud drifted across the brilliant blue sky. Pine forests replaced the open meadows, their deep green branches stretching overhead. The fresh, sharp scent of resin filled Anya's lungs with each breath. Blue jays called harshly from the treetops, their raucous voices echoing through the quiet forest. A flash of bright wings caught her eye as one swooped between the trunks. The bird's bold cry made her smile. It reminded her of the gulls that had followed their ship across the Atlantic, their voices a constant companion during those long weeks at sea. Near midday, Lucas led them to a clear creek that tumbled over moss-covered rocks. The horses lowered their heads to drink eagerly, while he helped Anya down from the saddle. "Best stretch your legs," he said, reaching into his saddlebags. He pulled out a cloth-wrapped package and handed it to her. Inside, she found dried beef jerky and a half loaf of bread from the town bakery. They sat on sun-warmed rocks beside the creek, eating in companionable silence. The running water made a pleasant music, and tiny birds flitted among the bushes searching for seeds. Anya's muscles gradually began to unknot in the warmth. Lucas picked up their empty canteen and gestured for her to follow. "I'll show you where to fill this," he said, leading her upstream a short way. "Always get your water above where the horses drink, where it's running clear over the rocks." He demonstrated how to hold the canteen so the current would fill it without gathering sediment from the bottom. It was a small lesson, but Anya appreciated that he took the time to teach her rather than simply doing it himself. As they sat again by their horses, Anya gathered her courage to break the silence. "May I ask about your life here?" she said softly. "What work do you do?" Lucas was quiet for a long moment, absently running a piece of grass between his fingers. "I trap mostly," he said finally. "Beaver, mink, fox when I can find them. Trade the pelts in town a couple times a year for supplies." He glanced at her. "It's a solitary life. Not much company except the mountains." Anya nodded, understanding his unspoken question about how she would adapt to such isolation. "I'm used to quiet," she offered. "In Ireland, our cottage was far from the village." She hesitated, then added quietly, After the potato crop failed, but there wasn't much socializing anyway. People turned inward with their grief. Lucas's weathered face showed no pity, only understanding. He nodded once, acknowledging her loss without forcing her to speak of it further. Anya was grateful for his restraint. The memories of those desperate years were still too raw to share easily. They remounted and continued their journey, climbing steadily higher into the mountains. The afternoon sun slanted through the trees, casting long shadows across their path. Anya's body had begun to adjust somewhat to the rhythm of riding, though she knew she would be stiff and sore tomorrow. The trail wound through stands of aspen trees, their leaves shimmering gold in the late light. As they rounded a bend, Lucas reined his horse to a stop and pointed ahead. "There," he said simply. Anya followed his gesture and saw a clearing open up before them. A log cabin stood in its center, rough-hewn but solid, with a stone chimney from which a thin curl of smoke rose against the darkening sky. A small barn or stable stood to one side, and she could see a vegetable garden enclosed by a rail fence. Lucas led them into the yard and dismounted quickly, coming to help her down from her horse. Anya's legs nearly buckled as her feet touched the ground, but his strong hands steadied her until she found her balance. He led the horses to the stable while Anya stood taking in her new home. The cabin was larger than it had first appeared, with a proper door and 2 windows with glass panes. A stack of split firewood lined one wall, and she noticed herbs hanging to dry under the cabin's small front overhang. When Lucas returned, he carried her carpet bag in one hand. He opened the cabin door and stood aside, letting her enter first. The single room was warm from a banked fire in the stone fireplace. Pelts lined the walls, fox, beaver, and others she couldn't name, providing both decoration and insulation. A sturdy table with 2 chairs stood near one window, and she saw shelves holding cooking implements and supplies. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt occupied one corner, while a larger bed stood against the far wall. "It's not much," Lucas said quietly behind her, "but it's home now." Anya set her carpet bag down beside the door, her heart beating quickly. The cabin was clean and well-maintained, with signs of careful craftsmanship in its construction. Yet the thought of sharing this intimate space with a man she barely knew filled her with equal measures of fear and relief. Fear of the unknown future ahead. Relief at having found shelter and protection when she had expected to be sent away in disgrace. She turned to find Lucas watching her, his expression guarded. In his eyes, she saw the same uncertainty she felt. This hasty marriage had changed both their lives irrevocably. They were strangers bound together by circumstance and necessity, each hoping they had made the right choice. The fire popped and settled in the hearth, sending up a shower of sparks. Outside, a bird called once in the gathering dusk. Anya drew a deep breath of the pine-scented air, straightened her shoulders, and took her first step into her new life. As dusk settled over the mountain, Lucas lit an oil lamp and hung it from a hook in one of the ceiling beams. The warm light cast dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. He cleared his throat, gesturing toward a set of wooden pegs near the larger bed. "You can hang your things there," he said, "and there's space in the chest for whatever else you brought." He pulled open a sturdy pine chest at the foot of the bed, its hinges creaking softly. Anya picked up her carpet bag and moved toward the storage area. The floorboards were solid beneath her feet, worn smooth by years of use. She noticed how carefully the logs had been fitted together, the chinking between them neat and well-maintained. Though sparse, the cabin showed signs of skilled craftsmanship everywhere she looked. Her few belongings made a pitiful showing as she hung them up. 2 dresses besides the one she wore, a shawl, and her mother's worn Bible. The chest held little more than a spare blanket and some winter clothing. She closed it gently, aware of Lucas watching from across the room. His rifle hung on wooden pegs above the fireplace, within easy reach but safely above the flames. Below it sat his pipe and tobacco pouch on the stone mantel. Besides the 2 beds, the cabin held only the essential furniture. The table and chairs where they'd sat earlier, some shelves lined with provisions, and a few hooks holding cooking pots. Lucas moved to the fireplace and stirred the coals, adding another log. "Take the bed," he said, nodding toward the larger one. "I'll sleep here by the fire." "Oh no, I couldn't," Anya protested weakly, though her tired muscles ached for real rest. It's your bed. And you're my wife now, Lucas said simply. The bed's yours. His tone was gentle but firm, brooking no argument. He turned to the shelves and began gathering supplies for their supper. Anya watched as he moved with quiet efficiency, taking down a pot and some dried vegetables. From a hook near the door, he cut several strips of dark venison. "May I help?" she asked hesitantly. Lucas nodded. "There's water in that bucket if you want to fill the pot." They worked together in silence, Lucas preparing the meat while Anya added water and vegetables to the pot. She noticed how he kept the fire at just the right height for cooking, adjusting the logs with practiced ease. Soon, the rich smell of venison stew filled the cabin. While the food simmered, Lucas pulled out 2 tin plates and cups, setting them on the table. Anya found herself studying his movements, trying to learn the rhythms of this new household. His actions were deliberate but unhurried, each motion serving a purpose. When the stew was ready, they sat across from each other at the small table. The lamplight caught the silver threading through Lucas's dark hair at his temples. His face was weathered from years in the mountains, but his eyes were clear and direct when they met hers. Anya took a spoonful of the hot stew, savoring the rich taste. After weeks of ship's rations and railway station meals, real food was a blessing. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for the meal, but for—" She gestured vaguely, encompassing everything that had happened that day. "For taking you in?" Lucas asked. She nodded, dropping her eyes to her plate. "I don't understand why you did it. You don't know me at all." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, stirring his stew thoughtfully. "What Kincaid did wasn't right," he said finally. "Sending for a bride, then shaming her in public like that. No one deserves such treatment." He took a bite of stew, chewed slowly. "Man's got more money than conscience always has. But to marry a stranger," Anya pressed gently. Lucas shrugged, his broad shoulders rising and falling. "Seemed the right thing to do." He didn't elaborate further, and Anya didn't push. They finished their meal in comfortable silence. Lucas rose to clean the dishes while Anya remained at the table, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. Despite the strangeness of her situation, she felt oddly peaceful. The cabin was warm and secure, and Lucas, though quiet, had shown nothing but kindness. When the dishes were done, Lucas settled into a chair near the hearth, pulling out his pipe. The sweet smell of tobacco soon mingled with the wood smoke. Anya moved to sit in the other chair, holding her hands out to the warmth of the fire. Outside, the night had deepened, and she could hear the wind moving through the pine trees. Lucas smoked quietly, occasionally glancing at her when he thought she wouldn't notice. His presence was solid and reassuring, like the mountains themselves. The silence between them felt less awkward now, as if they were beginning to find their way toward understanding each other. A wolf howled in the distance, the sound echoing off the mountainsides. Anya started slightly, and Lucas smiled faintly around his pipe stem. "They won't come near the cabin," he said. "Just talking to each other up in the high country." Another wolf answered the first, their voices rising and falling in an ancient conversation. Anya listened, fascinated despite her initial fear. The wild song spoke of vast spaces and freedom, so different from the crowded streets of Dublin, or the confines of the ship that had brought her to America. As the evening wore on, exhaustion from the long day began to catch up with her. Her eyes grew heavy, and she found herself stifling yawns. Lucas noticed and knocked the ashes from his pipe. "Best get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be another full day." Anya rose stiffly, her muscles protesting the hours of riding. She collected her nightdress from the pegs and stepped behind a wooden screen in one corner to change. The cabin had grown cool away from the fire, and she hurried into the bed, pulling the quilts up to her chin. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, the mattress stuffed with fresh straw and topped with a feather tick. Still, sleep felt strange in this unfamiliar place. She lay looking up at the log rafters, listening to Lucas move about the cabin, banking the fire for the night. He spread his blanket on the floor near the hearth, close enough to tend the fire, but maintaining a respectful distance from her bed. The lamp was extinguished, leaving only the red glow of the coals to light the darkness. Anya could hear Lucas settling into his makeshift bed. the floor creaking slightly under his weight. The fire popped and hissed, sending up occasional sparks. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the black sky like diamond dust. "Lord," she whispered into the darkness, her voice barely a breath. "Give me courage for this new life. Help me be worthy of this man's kindness." She closed her eyes, adding silently, "And help him find peace in sharing his solitude." The fire crackled low, its warmth reaching out to wrap around them both. Gradually, Anya's breathing deepened and slowed. Just before sleep took her, she heard Lucas shift on his blanket and knew he was still awake, keeping watch through the night. The first light of dawn crept through the cabin's small window, painting pale stripes across the rough-hewn floor. Anya woke to the sound of Lucas stirring the fire back to life. She blinked away sleep, watching as he added kindling to the glowing embers. "Morning," he said quietly, noticing she was awake. "Best get started early. Mountain days begin with the sun." Anya nodded, sliding out from under the warm quilts. The cabin air was crisp, and she quickly dressed behind the wooden screen, grateful for the woolen shawl she'd brought from Ireland. When she emerged, Lucas was pulling on his boots by the door. "First thing's getting water," he said, picking up 2 wooden buckets. "Spring's behind the cabin. Come on, I'll show you." Anya followed him outside. The morning air bit at her cheeks and frost crunched under her feet. Behind the cabin, a narrow path wound through tall pines to where water bubbled up from the ground, clear as glass. Lucas demonstrated how to dip the bucket without stirring up sediment. "Keep it level when you carry it," he advised, lifting his own buckets with practiced ease. "Takes some getting used to, but you'll manage." Anya gripped her bucket's handle and lifted. Water sloshed over the rim as she struggled with its weight. Her arms trembled, but she was determined not to show weakness. Slowly, she made her way back to the cabin, spilling only a little. "Not bad," Lucas said, his voice encouraging. "You'll get stronger with time." While Anya caught her breath, Lucas grabbed his axe from beside the door. "Need to split more firewood," he explained. "Cabin needs sweeping if you've a mind to it. Broom's behind the door." Anya found the rough-bristled broom and began working her way across the floor. Through the window, she could hear the steady thunk of Lucas's axe against wood. The familiar task of sweeping gave her confidence, though the uneven floorboards made it challenging. By mid-morning, Lucas had a good pile of split wood stacked against the cabin wall. He came inside, stamping snow from his boots. "Time you saw the root cellar," he said. "Follow me." Outside again, he led her to a low door set into a hillside near the cabin. It creaked open to reveal earthen steps leading down into cool darkness. Lucas lit a lamp, illuminating rows of shelves lined with vegetables. "Potatoes here," he pointed, "turnips there. Got some dried beans in those sacks. Winter's long up here. Have to store plenty." Anya breathed in the earthy smell, noting how well organized everything was. Despite his solitary ways, Lucas clearly knew how to maintain a proper household. They emerged from the cellar into brightening day. Back in the cabin, Lucas set about making coffee. The familiar smell filled the small space as he poured 2 cups, gesturing for Anya to join him at the table. "Mountain life is hard," he said, studying her over his cup, "but it's steady. Follow the seasons, mind the weather, keep working. You'll do fine." Anya wrapped her hands around her cup, savoring its warmth. "I've never cooked over a hearth before," she admitted softly. "In Ireland, we had a proper stove before," she trailed off, unwilling to speak of the famine years. Lucas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'll show you," he said. Rising, he moved to the fireplace. "See how the kettle hangs here? You can adjust the height with this chain. For baking, you need coals pulled forward like this." He demonstrated how to arrange the fire, explaining which woods burned hottest and how to bank coals for overnight cooking. Anya watched intently, determined to learn. "Might try some cornbread," he suggested. "Flour's in that barrel, cornmeal next to it." Anya gathered the ingredients, following Lucas's instructions for mixing the batter. Her hands shook slightly as she poured it into the heavy iron skillet. Lucas showed her how to position it near the coals, explaining how to tell when it was done. When she pulled it out, the bread was unevenly cooked, burnt on one side, barely done on the other. Anya's face fell at the sight of her failure, but Lucas cut a piece anyway. "Well, he said, chewing thoughtfully. It's got character. His eyes crinkled at the corners, and suddenly they were both laughing, a short, surprised sound that seemed to startle them both. I'm sorry, Anya said, still smiling. I'll do better next time. You will, Lucas agreed. Took me plenty of tries to get it right myself. The afternoon stretched on, shadows growing longer across the cabin floor. Anya noticed a torn shirt hanging from one of the wall pegs. She took out her sewing kit from her carpet bag, grateful to have something familiar to do. The shirt was rough homespun, nothing like the fine linens she'd sewn in Ireland. Her stitches looked clumsy on the thick fabric, but she persisted, determined to make them strong, if not beautiful. Lucas paused in his work of repairing a trap to watch her. That's good work, he said quietly. Been meaning to mend that for months. Anya felt her cheeks warm at the praise, though she knew the stitches were far from perfect. Thank you, she murmured, focusing on her needle to hide her pleasure at his words. As evening approached, they prepared a simple supper together. Lucas showed her how to make a basic stew, and Anya managed to heat water for tea without incident. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the wooden shutters against the cabin walls. They ate by lamplight, the fire casting dancing shadows. The cabin felt snug against the growing dark, and Anya found herself relaxing slightly. The day's small victories, carrying water, learning the hearth, mending the shirt, gave her hope. Lucas seemed more at ease too, occasionally offering bits of advice about mountain life between bites of stew. The silence between them felt more comfortable now, less weighted with uncertainty. The wind gusted against the cabin walls, but inside it was warm and quiet. Anya looked around at what was now her home, the neat shelves, the swept floor, the mended shirt hanging by the fire. For the first time since stepping off the train, she felt something like belonging stirring in her heart. It was fragile, this new feeling, like spring ice on the creek, but as she watched Lucas bank the fire for the night, his movements sure and steady in the familiar space, Anya began to believe that survival here might be possible. Not just survival, but perhaps in time something more. The mountain days settled into a gentle rhythm. Each morning, Anya rose with the sun, her muscles gradually adjusting to the weight of the water buckets. The spring's path became familiar under her feet, and she found herself humming old Irish tunes as she worked. Lucas spent long hours in the forest, checking his trap lines and gathering wood. When he returned, his quiet presence filled the cabin with a steady calm that Anya had come to appreciate. The silence between them grew comfortable, like a well-worn quilt. You're getting stronger, Lucas observed one morning as she carried 2 full buckets without spilling. Anya couldn't help but smile at the note of approval in his voice. Her hands, once soft from gentle work, grew calloused from tending the fire and handling rough-hewn tools. Yet she took pride in these changes, seeing them as marks of her adaptation to mountain life. The cabin transformed slowly under her care. Her stitching improved, evident in the neat repairs to Lucas's shirts and the cushion covers she'd fashioned from old blankets. Each evening, she practiced with the hearth, learning its moods like those of a temperamental friend. On the 5th day, Lucas returned early carrying several plump rabbits. Time you learned this too, he said, laying them on the outdoor table he used for such work. Anya approached hesitantly. In Ireland, she'd never prepared meat from the start. Lucas noticed her uncertainty and smiled gently. Here, he said, demonstrating with skilled hands. Hold it firm like this. The knife needs to be sharp, makes it cleaner. He worked slowly, showing her each step. Anya's stomach turned at first, but she forced herself to watch. When Lucas offered her the knife, her hands trembled slightly. You don't have to, he said quietly. No, she replied, straightening her shoulders. I need to learn. Her first attempts were clumsy, but Lucas guided her hands patiently. That's it, he encouraged. Follow the natural lines. Don't force it. By the 3rd rabbit, her movements grew more confident. When she finished, Lucas nodded approvingly. Well done. Most folks take longer to master that. That evening, determined to prove herself further, Anya focused on making bread. She'd been practicing daily, and this time the dough felt right under her hands. She watched it rise properly, then slid it into the Dutch oven with a prayer. The smell of baking bread filled the cabin. When she finally pulled it out, the loaf was golden and perfect. Lucas cut a thick slice, steam rising in the cool air. "Best bread I've had in years," he declared, reaching for a second piece. Anya beamed at the praise, her cheeks warm with pleasure. The next day, they needed supplies from town. Anya's heart fluttered nervously as they rode down the mountain trail. She hadn't returned since their wedding night, and memories of that day still stung. The town seemed smaller now, less intimidating after her time in the mountains. Yet as they tied their horses outside the general store, she felt eyes following them. Whispers trailed in their wake like autumn leaves. Inside the store, Lucas handed her a list. "Get what we need," he said quietly. "I'll see to the grain and feed." Anya moved through the aisles, gathering sugar, coffee, and other necessities. She tried to ignore the stares of other customers, focusing on her task. The storekeeper's wife watched her with barely concealed curiosity. As she waited for her purchases to be wrapped, the door opened. Henry Kincaid's voice carried clearly through the store. "Shameful business, that marriage," he declared loudly to his companions. "Nothing but spite, that's what it was. Boone only did it to get at me. Everyone knows that." Anya's cheeks burned, her hands clutched to the edge of the counter, knuckles white with tension. "Invalid, that's what it is," Kincaid continued. "No proper notice given, no public announcement. Could be undone easy as untying a knot." Lucas appeared beside her, his face dark with anger. His eyes met Kincaid's across the store, and something in his gaze made the wealthy rancher fall silent. "Your goods are ready, Mrs. Boone," the storekeeper said quickly, emphasizing her married name. Lucas paid for their supplies, his movements controlled but tension evident in every line of his body. He helped Anya load their purchases, shielding her from the curious onlookers with his broad shoulders. The ride home was quiet. Clouds gathered over the mountains, matching Anya's troubled thoughts. When they reached the cabin, Lucas took care of the horses while she stored their supplies. Finally, as they sat before the fire that evening, Anya found the courage to speak. What Mr. Kincaid said, she began hesitantly. Could it be true? Could our marriage be undone so easily? Lucas turned to face her, his expression serious in the firelight. "No," he said firmly. "You're my wife, Anya. Made my vows before God and meant every word. Don't matter what Kincaid or anyone else says." But there was no proper notice, she persisted, voicing her fears. No family present, no celebration. "Notice enough when I spoke up in front of the whole town," Lucas replied. "Preacher made it legal and proper. Kincaid's just trying to cause trouble because he can't stand being shown up." He reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his larger one. "You belong here now," he said softly. "Won't let anyone take that from you." The fire crackled, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, an owl called into the gathering night. Anya looked at their joined hands, feeling the strength in his gentle grip. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the fire's song. Lucas squeezed her hand once before letting go. "Best get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow's another day." Anya lay in bed that night, listening to the familiar sounds of the cabin settling. Lucas's steady breathing near the hearth comforted her, yet Kincaid's words echoed in her mind. She knew the wealthy rancher's influence ran deep in the county. Still, Lucas's vow rang truer than any threat. In the short time she'd known him, she'd learned he was a man of his word. His quiet strength had already protected her once, standing against public scorn to offer her a home. Though fear lingered like morning mist in her heart, Anya found herself believing in the sanctuary they'd built together. Whatever came next, she was Lucas Boone's wife. That truth felt solid as the cabin's stone foundation, unmovable as the mountains themselves. A week passed like water flowing in the creek, each day bringing new lessons in mountain life. One crisp morning, Anya woke to find the world transformed. A delicate dusting of snow covered everything in sight, turning the forest into a dreamscape of white. Lucas came in from feeding the horses, his breath visible in the cold air. "Time you learned to move in this," he said, retrieving 2 pairs of wooden frames from the wall. "Can't stay cabin-bound all winter." Anya studied the strange contraptions with curiosity. The snowshoes were crude but sturdy, woven with rawhide strips in a lattice pattern across wooden frames. Lucas knelt before her, showing her how to strap them onto her boots. "They'll feel awkward at first," he warned, tightening the bindings. "But they'll keep you from sinking in deep snow." Anya took her first tentative step and immediately stumbled. Lucas caught her arm, his grip steady and sure. "Small steps," he instructed. "Wider stance than normal. Let the shoe do the work." She tried again, feeling ungainly as a newborn colt. Her feet wanted to tangle with each step, and she clutched Lucas's arm for balance. A laugh bubbled up from her chest as she nearly toppled over. To her surprise, Lucas laughed too, a rich, warm sound she'd rarely heard before. "You're doing better than I did my first time," he assured her. "Fell flat on my face in front of my pa." Gradually, Anya found her rhythm. The trick was to lift her feet higher than usual, sliding them forward rather than stepping. Lucas walked beside her, matching her pace as they practiced near the cabin. "Think you're ready for a longer trek?" he asked after she'd managed several circuits without falling. "Need to check my trap line up in the high meadow." Anya nodded, determination setting her jaw. "I'll manage." They set out through the transformed landscape. Every branch wore a coating of white, and their breath rose in clouds before them. The forest was hushed, sounds muffled by the snow. Only the soft swish of their snowshoes and the occasional cry of a jay broke the silence. The climb to the high meadow was gradual but steady. Anya's legs soon burned with the unfamiliar exercise, but she pressed on. Lucas pointed out tracks in the snow: deer, rabbit, fox, teaching her to read the story, they told. "See there?" He indicated a set of delicate prints. "Vole came out looking for seeds, but never made it home. Owl got it. You can see where the wings brush the snow." Anya marveled at this new way of seeing. The mountain wasn't empty at all, but full of life and drama if one knew how to look. The high meadow opened before them, a sweep of white broken by dark shapes of rocks and scattered pines. Lucas's trapline followed the edge of the tree line. Some traps were empty, but others held their prey. Rabbits and foxes, their fur thick for winter. "These pelts will fetch good prices," Lucas explained as he worked, his movements swift and practiced. "Traders come through the valley every few months. We'll trade for flour, sugar, coffee, whatever we need that we can't make ourselves." Anya watched closely, learning this part of mountain life too. Nothing was wasted. Even the meat would feed them or be used as bait for other traps. The cold began seeping through her layers of clothing. Lucas noticed her shivering and called a halt to the lesson. "Time to head back," he said, securing his prizes. "Don't want you catching a chill." The return journey was easier, mostly downhill. Anya found herself appreciating the snowshoes now, understanding how they made winter travel possible. The afternoon light turned golden, casting long shadows across the pristine snow. Back at the cabin, Lucas built up the fire while Anya prepared coffee. The warmth slowly returned to her fingers and toes as they sat before the hearth. She found herself studying the cabin's familiar features: the rough-hewn walls, the shelves lined with supplies, the few personal touches that marked it as a home. Her eyes caught on something she'd noticed before but never asked about: a small framed portrait on the highest shelf. The daguerreotype was faded, but she could make out a woman's face, young and pretty, holding a small child. Lucas followed her gaze. For a long moment he was silent. Then, with careful movements, he stood and retrieved the portrait, holding it tenderly. "My Sarah," he said softly, "and our boy William." His voice carried years of grief, like layers of snow built up over time. Anya's heart ached at the pain in his words. She waited, sensing he needed to speak at his own pace. "Fever took them 6 years back," he continued. "Started with William first. Sarah wouldn't leave his side, nursing him day and night. By the time the doctor came up from town, it was too late for both of them." His hands trembled slightly as he held the portrait. William was just 4. Had his mother's laugh, way of looking at everything like it was new and wonderful. Sarah. She could make this cabin feel like a palace, always singing, always finding beauty in small things. Anya reached out slowly, laying her hand on his arm. She didn't speak. No words could ease such loss, but offered what comfort she could through touch. "Blamed God for a long time," Lucas admitted. "Blamed myself for not getting help sooner. Blamed the mountain for being too far from town. Finally, just stopped feeling much of anything. Easier that way." He set the portrait carefully on the table between them. Hadn't taken it down in years. Couldn't bear to look at it. couldn't bear to put it away neither. They were beautiful, Anya said softly. Thank you for sharing them with me. Lucas nodded, his throat working. After a moment, he spoke again, his voice rough with emotion. Never thought I'd have anyone else here. Reckoned I'd live out my days alone, and that was fitting punishment for failing them. You didn't fail them, Anya said firmly. You loved them. Sometimes love isn't enough to save people, but that doesn't make it worth less. Lucas looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing something new. You've known loss too, he said. It wasn't a question. My sister, Anya admitted. During the famine, we shared our food with her children, but in the end, it wasn't enough. Sometimes I dream I'm still hearing them cry. The fire crackled between them, its warmth touching their faces like gentle hands. Lucas covered her hand with his own, a gesture of shared understanding. Reckon maybe that's why, he said slowly. Why I couldn't just stand there and watch Kincaid shame you. Saw something in your eyes. Same thing I see in the mirror some mornings. That look of someone who's carried more than their share of hurt. Anya felt tears prick her eyes, but they were healing tears like spring rain. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me, for giving me a chance at a new life. They sat together as the light faded outside, the portrait between them like a bridge connecting past to present. The silence was comfortable now, filled with shared understanding. When Lucas finally rose to bank the fire for the night, something had shifted between them. A deepening of trust, a recognition of kindred spirits. The small cabin felt different somehow. No longer just a shelter, but a place where healing could begin. As Anya prepared for sleep, she watched Lucas carefully return the portrait to its shelf. But this time she noticed he didn't immediately turn away. Instead, he touched the frame gently like a benediction, before joining her by the fire. The morning dawned clear but bitter cold. Lucas studied their dwindling supplies while Anya scraped the bottom of the flour barrel for breakfast. Need to make a supply run, he announced, pulling on his heavy coat. Lamp oil's running low, too. Anya nodded, already wrapping herself in layers of wool. The thought of town made her stomach twist, but necessities couldn't wait. Lucas helped her into his spare coat, the fabric still carrying his scent of pine and tobacco. Roads will be icy, he warned, saddling their horses. We'll take it slow. The journey down the mountain took twice as long as usual. Their horses picked their way carefully over frozen ground, hooves crunching through sheets of ice. Anya's breath frosted in the air, and her fingers grew numb despite thick mittens. Lucas rode close beside her, watching for any sign she might slip. The sun was high by the time they reached town. Main Street was quiet, with only a few wagons creaking past and women hurrying between shops, shawls pulled tight. As they tied their horses outside the mercantile, Anya felt the familiar weight of stairs. Inside, the store was warm but unwelcoming. The shopkeeper's wife barely glanced up from her ledger as Lucas listed their needs. While he counted out coffee and beans, Anya moved through the aisles, gathering lamp oil and matches. She could hear whispers behind the fabric bolts where two women stopped their conversation to watch her pass. Heard tell she bewitched him somehow, one murmured, not quite soft enough. Mountain man like that? Taking a stranger bride? Ain't natural. Anya's cheeks burned, but she kept her head high, remembering Lucas's words about belonging. She was selecting flour when a familiar voice rang out clear and kind through the store. Mrs. Boone, how wonderful to see you both. And the preacher stood in the doorway, his weathered face creased in a genuine smile. He crossed to where Lucas was settling their bill, extending his hand warmly. Brother Boone, you're looking well. I've noticed you both at services regular as clockwork since the wedding. Does my heart good to see it. Lucas shook the offered hand, some tension easing from his shoulders. Appreciate your welcome, Reverend. And how are you finding mountain life, Mrs. Boone? The preacher asked, turning to Anya. Quite a change from Ireland, I imagine. It is, sir, Anya replied softly. But I'm learning. Lucas is a patient teacher. The preacher's kind words seemed to shift the air in the store. The whispers died down, and even the shopkeeper's wife managed a small nod as they gathered their purchases. They were nearly to the door when the clerk, a thin young man with ink-stained fingers, hurried after them. Mr. Boone, almost forgot, this came for you yesterday. He thrust a folded paper into Lucas's hands. The official seal was visible even before he opened it, dark and formal against the cream-colored page. Lucas read quickly, his jaw tightening with each line. Anya touched his arm. "What is it?" "Kincaid," he growled, crushing the paper in his fist. "Filed a petition to annul our marriage. Claims fraud and some nonsense about land disputes." The room seemed to spin. Anya grabbed the doorframe to steady herself, her voice barely a whisper. "Can he do that?" "He can try." Lucas's tone was steel. He took her elbow, guiding her out to their horses. "We'll fight it, Anya. I promise you that." They loaded their supplies in silence, aware of faces watching from shop windows. Lucas helped Anya mount, his hands lingering protectively at her waist. The ride out of town was tense, neither speaking until the buildings fell away behind them. Near midday, they stopped at Willow Creek to rest the horses. The water ran black between ice-crusted banks, and the wind carried the promise of snow. While the horses drank, Anya finally voiced the fear that had been choking her. "What if," she swallowed hard, "what if he wins? What if I cost you your home?" Lucas turned to her, his expression fierce. "Listen to me, Anya. None of this is your fault. Kincaid's had his eye on my spring for years. Claims he needs it for his cattle. This is just his latest attempt to force me out. But why target our marriage? Because he's a snake who'll use any weapon he can find." Lucas stepped closer, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "But he doesn't understand what he's fighting. You belong here now, with me, in our home. I meant those vows I spoke in church, and I'll say them again in front of any judge Kincaid drags us before." Anya searched his face, finding only truth there. "I meant my vows too," she whispered. His fingers tightened on hers. "Then we face this together." The moment held, deep and sure, until the first snowflakes began to fall. Lucas glanced at the heavy clouds rolling in. "Storm's coming. We'd best get home." They rode faster now, despite the treacherous ground. The snow thickened quickly, cutting visibility to a few yards. By the time they reached the cabin, white was falling in thick curtains, and the wind had picked up to a howl. "Get inside," Lucas ordered, lifting Anya down. "I'll see to the horses." She hurried to light the lamps and stoke the fire while he worked in the barn. When he finally came in, stamping snow from his boots, his beard was crusted with ice. "Going to be a long night," he said, hanging his coat by the fire. "Better stack more wood inside while we can." Together they made trip after trip to the woodpile, building up a supply that would last through the storm. The work was hard, but it felt right, facing the challenge as one. When the last load was stacked, they stood before the fire, warming their hands. Lucas pulled the crumpled notice from his pocket, studying it in the lamplight. "First thing tomorrow, I'll write to Judge Matthews in Denver. He's a fair man, won't let Kincaid railroad us without proof." "And if Kincaid has proof," Anya asked softly. "Of what? That I married you to spite him?" Lucas shook his head. "Maybe that was part of it at first. But what we've built here, what we're building, that's real. No judge can deny that." Outside, the storm raged, rattling the shutters and moaning through the pine trees. But inside the cabin, Anya felt the warmth of more than just the fire. They had created something here, something worth fighting for. As she helped Lucas lay out supper, she realized she no longer thought of herself as the unwanted bride. She was Mrs. Boone now, and this mountain was her home. The evening passed quietly as the snow piled up outside. They spoke little, but the silence was comfortable, filled with shared purpose. When Lucas finally banked the fire for the night, Anya noticed he positioned his bedroll closer to hers than usual. Whether for warmth or protection, she wasn't sure. But as she drifted off to sleep, she felt safer knowing he was near. The storm howled on, testing the cabin's strength. But like the marriage it sheltered, the rough-hewn walls held firm, keeping the wild night at bay. The storm howled through the night, rattling the cabin's shutters and piling snow against the walls. By morning, a thick white blanket stretched unbroken from the doorstep to the tree line. Lucas stood at the window, watching the relentless flurries swirl past. "Looks like we're staying put for a spell," he said, turning to where Anya was stoking the fire. 2 days at least by the look of those clouds. Anya nodded, adding another log to the flames. The cabin felt smaller somehow, with the storm pressing in from all sides. But there was comfort in its snug walls, in the warmth of the hearth, and the familiar scent of wood smoke. Lucas settled at the table with his trap-making supplies spread before him. His large hands worked deftly, mending broken chains and checking mechanisms. The metallic clicks and scrapes filled the quiet air as Anya went about her morning tasks. Near midday, she pulled a small leather-bound book from her carpet bag. The prayer book's pages were worn soft with use, its corners rounded from years of handling. She sat in the chair by the fire, drawing comfort from the familiar words. Lucas glanced up from his work, watching as her lips moved silently over the prayers. Something in her peaceful expression made him pause, remembering how Sarah used to pray each morning, head bowed over their rough table. "Would you?" Anya's voice was hesitant. "Would you like to pray with me?" Lucas's hand stilled on the trap chain. "Been a long time since I talked to God," he said gruffly. "Not sure he's listening anymore." "He always listens," Anya said softly, "even when we think he's far away." Lucas stayed silent, but his shoulders carried a new tension. Anya didn't press further, returning to her quiet devotions. The day wore on, marked by the steady fall of snow outside and the rhythm of their indoor tasks. That evening, as they sat before the fire, Anya began reading aloud. Her voice was clear and gentle, carrying the ancient words of comfort through the cabin. Lucas pretended to focus on his mending, but his hands moved slower, his attention caught by the familiar phrases. When she reached Psalm 23, his voice suddenly joined hers, rough but sure. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Anya's eyes widened, but she continued, their voices twining together in the firelit room. The prayer ended, leaving a weighted silence broken only by the crackling flames. "My mother taught me that one," Lucas said finally. "Used to say it every night with Sarah," and he trailed off, unable to speak their lost child's name. Anya reached across the space between them, touching his arm gently. "Thank you for sharing it with me." The second day of storm passed similarly, with Lucas working on his gear, while Anya alternated between household tasks and quiet prayer. Occasionally, he would join her, his voice growing more confident with each shared devotion. Dawn of the third day brought clearing skies and a transformed landscape. Drifts rose halfway up the cabin walls, gleaming pristine in the early light. Lucas pulled on his heavy coat and boots. "Best dig us out before this freezes solid," he said, grabbing the wooden snow shovel. Through the window, Anya watched him work, his broad shoulders swinging rhythmically as he carved a path to the barn. Steam rose from his efforts in the crystal air. She busied herself preparing a thick soup, knowing he would need warming when he finished. While the soup simmered, she decided to organize the shelf where Lucas kept his papers and maps. As she sorted through the weathered documents, a rolled parchment caught her eye. Carefully unfolding it, she found herself looking at a detailed survey map of the valley. Her finger traced the careful lines, noting the familiar landmarks: the creek, the rocky outcrops, the cabin's location. Then she saw it, the spring marked clearly behind their home, with a surveyor's note in faded ink. "Only reliable year-round water source in Upper Valley." The soup pot bubbled, but Anya stood frozen, understanding dawning. This wasn't just about spite or wounded pride. Kincaid's cattle empire needed water, and Lucas's spring was the key to controlling the entire valley. The door opened, bringing a blast of cold air and Lucas covered in snow. He stamped his boots, then noticed her holding the map. "Found something interesting?" he asked, moving to warm his hands by the fire. "The spring," she said. "This is why Kincaid wants to break our marriage, isn't it? To force you off this land?" Lucas's face hardened. He nodded grimly. "Been trying for years, offered to buy it first, then started making threats. Guess he figured attacking our marriage was his next best move. But why not just file a water rights claim? My father's claim is ironclad, registered in Denver 30 years ago. Marriage laws are messier, easier to challenge." He ran a hand through his snow-dampened hair. "Especially a marriage like ours." Anya rolled the map carefully, returning it to its shelf. "Then we'll fight him together. This is our home now." Lucas looked at her, then really looked at her, as if seeing something new in her determined expression. "You know," he said slowly, I've been thinking lately about how different this place feels with you here. Different? She stirred the soup, trying to calm her suddenly racing heart. Better, he said simply. Less empty. Guess I didn't realize how lonely it was, being up here alone all those years. Anya felt warmth flood her cheeks that had nothing to do with the cooking fire. I'm glad I'm here too, she whispered. Their eyes met across the room, holding a moment longer than usual. Then Lucas cleared his throat, moving to get bowls for their supper. But something had shifted between them, subtle as a change in the wind. They ate their soup in comfortable silence, watching evening settle over the snow-bright valley. The spring bubbled beneath its blanket of white, precious and pure as the growing bond between them. Whatever Kincaid planned next, they would face it together, not just as a marriage of convenience anymore, but as true partners in this mountain home. The morning sun glinted off the fresh snow as Lucas and Anya guided their horses down the mountain trail. The storm had left the path treacherous, forcing them to pick their way carefully between ice-slicked rocks and deep drifts. Lucas rode slightly ahead, testing questionable spots before letting Anya's mare follow. "Watch that patch there," he called back, pointing to a deceptively smooth stretch. "Ice under that powder." Anya nodded, guiding her horse wide around the hazard. She'd grown more confident in the saddle over the past weeks, though the winter conditions still made her nervous. The leather reins felt stiff in her gloved hands. They reached town by mid-morning, the streets already busy with wagons and townspeople going about their business. Lucas helped Anya dismount outside the church, his strong hands steady at her waist. The preacher's house sat just behind the white-painted building, smoke curling from its chimney. Reverend Matthews opened his door before they could knock, as if he'd been watching for them. Come in," he said warmly. "Mrs. Boone, you must be half frozen. There's coffee on the stove." The preacher's study was cramped but cozy, books lining every wall. As they settled into worn chairs, clutching steaming cups, Matthews pulled out a folder of papers. "I've asked John Cooper to join us," he said. "He's the most honest lawyer in 3 counties, and we'll need his counsel." As if on cue, a knock sounded. Cooper proved to be a slight man with wire-rimmed spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He listened intently as Lucas explained the situation, occasionally jotting notes in a small leather book. "Kincaid's petition is troubling," Cooper said finally, removing his glasses to polish them. "He's claiming the marriage was performed under false pretenses, that it was solely to deny him legal access to water rights." "That's nonsense," Lucas growled. "I married Anya because," and he stopped abruptly, glancing at her. "Because it was the right thing to do," Anya finished softly. Cooper sighed. "The truth may not matter as much as influence. Kincaid has friends in high places, deep pockets too. Judges can be persuaded." "You mean bribed," Lucas said flatly. "I mean persuaded," Cooper repeated carefully. "Look, I'll fight this with everything I've got, but you should be prepared. Kincaid usually gets what he wants." Lucas's jaw tightened. Anya could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the coffee cup too hard. She reached over, touching his arm gently. Some of the rigidity eased from his frame. They left the lawyer's office with heavy hearts, heading to the general store for supplies. Inside, the usual whispers followed them, heads bent together over dry goods and barrels. Anya tried to ignore them, focusing on their list. Flour, coffee, lamp oil. As she examined a shelf of medicines, a hesitant voice spoke behind her. "Mrs. Boone?" Anya turned to find Sarah Miller, one of the younger mothers in town. The woman twisted her apron nervously. I heard you know about healing herbs and such, being from the old country and all." "I learned some from my grandmother," Anya admitted. "She was a wise woman in our village." "My Tommy's got fever," Sarah blurted out. 3 days now, nothing helps. I know folks haven't been kind to you, but where is he?" Anya asked immediately. Relief flooded Sarah's face. "Just down the street. Would you come look at him?" Lucas, who had been listening nearby, nodded encouragement. "Go on. I'll finish up here." Anya followed Sarah to a small house where Tommy, a boy of perhaps 6, lay flushed and restless in bed. His younger sister peeked around the doorframe as Anya examined him, feeling his hot forehead and checking his throat. "He needs willow bark tea for the fever," Anya said. And I can make a poultice for his chest. The congestion's settling there. Do you have any dried herbs? Sarah shook her head helplessly. We have some at home, Anya said. I'll return tomorrow morning with what's needed. The ride back to the cabin was quiet, both of them lost in thought about Kincaid's threats. But as they stabled the horses, Anya began gathering supplies: willow bark, yarrow, dried mint, and mullein. You're good at this, Lucas observed, watching her skilled hands sort and measure herbs by lamplight. The healing work. Grandmother taught all her granddaughters, Anya replied, crushing dried leaves in her mortar. She said women must know how to ease suffering where they find it. Lucas moved closer, studying the neat bundle she was preparing. The lamp cast warm light across her face, catching golden glints in her hair. Her expression was intent, peaceful. We'll ride back early tomorrow, he said. That boy needs help. Dawn found them already on the trail, Anya's saddlebags full of remedies. They reached the Miller house just as the sun cleared the mountains. Sarah ushered them in, dark circles under her eyes showing her sleepless night. Tommy's fever still burned hot, but he managed a weak smile when Anya sat beside him. She showed Sarah how to brew the willow bark tea, adding honey to make it palatable. The poultice went on his chest, protected by soft flannel. Keep him drinking, Anya instructed. Water is important. And the tea, every few hours. She stayed through the morning, bathing Tommy's face with cool cloths, telling him quiet stories of Ireland to distract him. By afternoon, his fever had dropped slightly. Sarah nearly wept with relief. Word spread quickly through town. While Anya tended Tommy, several other mothers found excuses to visit, watching her work with careful eyes. One brought fresh-baked bread, another offered eggs from her hen house. My little one's got a cough, one woman ventured. Could you maybe look at her too? Anya smiled. Of course. Lucas insisted on staying in town with her, though he kept his distance, letting her work without interference. But his eyes followed her as she moved between sick beds, dispensing medicine and comfort with equal measure. The sun was setting when they finally headed home. Tommy's fever had broken, and 3 other children were sleeping easier. Sarah Miller had hugged Anya tight, whispering tearful thanks. You did good work today, Lucas said as they rode. Real good work. Anya flushed at the pride in his voice. It was nothing special, just what needed doing. No, Lucas said firmly, it was special. You're special. Their eyes met in the gathering dusk. Something warm unfurled in Anya's chest, like spring flowers opening to the sun. Lucas looked away first, but his expression was soft, thoughtful. Back at the cabin, Anya began replenishing her herb supplies by lamplight. Her fingers moved surely among the dried plants, measuring and mixing with practiced ease. Lucas sat nearby, supposedly cleaning his rifle, but she could feel his gaze on her more often than not. The familiar scents of mint and yarrow filled the cabin. Outside, an owl called softly through the winter night. Inside, in the lamp's gentle glow, something deeper than convenience or necessity was growing between them. Something as natural and vital as the healing herbs in Anya's gentle hands. January settled deep into the mountains, wrapping Lucas's cabin in pristine white. The days fell into a gentle rhythm, as natural as breathing. Each morning, Anya rose before dawn to kindle the fire while Lucas checked his trap lines. By the time he returned, stamping snow from his boots, coffee would be brewing and cornbread warming on the hearth. Smells like heaven in here, he'd say, hanging his snow-crusted coat by the door. The words became a familiar greeting, as comforting as the cabin's warmth after the biting cold outside. One crisp morning, Anya struggled with a particularly stubborn batch of biscuits. The dough refused to cooperate, crumbling beneath her fingers no matter how she kneaded it. Too dry, Lucas observed, watching from his chair where he was mending a broken snowshoe. Add a mite more buttermilk. Anya bit her lip in concentration, following his advice. To her delight, the dough finally came together smooth and pliant. When the biscuits emerged from the oven golden brown and perfect, she couldn't contain her proud smile. Well now, Lucas said, breaking one open to release a cloud of steam. Reckon you've mastered it. His eyes crinkled at the corners, a rare, full smile spreading across his weathered face. They shared the warm biscuits with fresh butter, savoring their simple triumph together. The days stretched longer, filled with shared work that slowly became familiar. Lucas taught her to split logs with the heavy axe, showing her how to stand so she wouldn't strain her back. Anya learned to bank the fire just right to keep it burning through the night, and her stews grew richer as she mastered cooking over the open hearth. Each Sunday, they hitched the horses and rode into town for church services. The whispers still followed them, but they were changing. Where there had once been mockery, Anya now caught notes of respect. Several of the mothers whose children she had tended would nod warmly as she passed. Even some of the men who had laughed at Lucas's impulsive marriage now touched their hats in greeting. Reverend Matthews always welcomed them heartily, making a point of stopping by their pew to chat. His friendly manner carried weight with the congregation, and gradually, the cold shoulders turned warmer. One evening, as the sun painted the snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold, Lucas brought out his rifle. It was a Winchester Model 1873, well-worn but meticulously maintained. Anya had watched him clean it countless times, his hands moving with practiced care over the weapon. "Time you learned to handle this," he said, his voice serious. "Mountain life ain't always gentle. Woman needs to know how to protect herself." Anya's hands trembled slightly as he placed the rifle in them. It was heavier than she expected, the wood smooth from years of use. "First rule," Lucas said firmly, "always treat it like it's loaded, even when you know it ain't." He showed her how to check the chamber, explaining each part's purpose in simple terms. "This here's a single action," he continued. "Means you gotta cock it manual-like before each shot." They spent an hour just on proper handling and loading before Lucas set up an old tin can on a fence post. Anya's first shot went wide, the recoil catching her by surprise. But Lucas was patient, adjusting her stance, showing her how to breathe steady and squeeze the trigger smooth. "Like kneading bread," he said, his hands warm on her shoulders as he positioned her. Nice and even. Her fifth shot pinged off the can, sending it spinning. The sound of Lucas's approval warmed her more than any fire could have. "Good shot," he said, pride evident in his voice. "Real good shot." As January melted into February, their partnership deepened into something both stronger and softer than either had expected. They moved around each other with easy familiarity, anticipating needs, sharing small kindnesses. Lucas would bring in extra wood before Anya could ask, and she learned to have hot coffee ready just when he needed it most. The evening peace was shattered one night by urgent pounding on their door. Lucas reached for his rifle, but the voice that called out was familiar. Jim Taylor, one of the few neighbors who had shown them consistent kindness. "Lucas, you there? Important news." The door opened to reveal Jim on horseback, his mount's sides heaving from hard riding. His face was grave in the lamplight that spilled from the cabin. "Better come in," Lucas said, reading the severity in Jim's expression. Anya's heart clenched, already sensing ill tidings. Jim slumped into a chair, accepting the cup of coffee Anya offered with trembling hands. "Been to town," he said without preamble. "Circuit judge finally ruled on Kincaid's petition." He took a deep breath. "It ain't good news." Lucas's face hardened to granite. "Tell it straight." "Judge ruled in Kincaid's favor," declared the marriage invalid, said it was performed under false pretenses. Jim couldn't meet their eyes. "Papers say Anya's to be removed to town within 3 days. Sheriff's been ordered to enforce it." The cup slipped from Anya's fingers, shattering on the floor. The sound seemed to echo in the suddenly airless cabin. She felt the walls of her world contracting, threatening to crush the life she and Lucas had built. "No." Lucas's voice was low, dangerous. "They can't do this. That judge is in Kincaid's pocket. Everyone knows it." "Ain't about right or wrong anymore," Jim said heavily. "It's about power and water rights. Kincaid's claiming the spring on your land is critical for his cattle operation. Marriage being voided gives him legal grounds to petition for access." Anya sank into a chair, her legs no longer able to support her. The comfortable cabin, which had become more home to her than any place she'd known, seemed to waver before her eyes like a mirage. Lucas paced the room like a caged wolf, his boots striking the floorboards with barely contained fury. 3 days, he growled. 3 days before they try to take my wife." He stopped suddenly, turning to Jim. "Who else knows?" Word's spreading fast. Some folks are right upset about it, especially them whose kids Anya helped. But Jim spread his hands helplessly. Law's law. Law's whatever Kincaid pays it to be, Lucas spat. He moved to the fireplace, throwing another log on savagely. The flames leaped high, casting wild shadows on the walls. I won't let them take her, Jim. I swore to protect her, and by God, I mean to keep that vow. Jim stood slowly, clearly troubled. Thought you should hear it first from a friend. Be careful, Lucas. Kincaid's got the law on his side now. After Jim left, silence filled the cabin like smoke. Anya stared at her hands, seeing again the ring Lucas had placed there that hasty night in the church. It had come to mean so much more than a simple band of metal. I'm sorry, she whispered. This is all my fault. If I hadn't come here... Stop. Lucas knelt before her chair, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. None of this is your fault. Kincaid's been after this water source for years. He's just using our marriage as an excuse. But what can we do? Anya's voice broke. They'll come with the law behind them. Lucas's grip tightened on her hands. Listen to me, he said fiercely. You're my wife. Not by some judge's ruling, but by my choice and yours. By the life we've built here together. I won't let them destroy that. The fire crackled high in the hearth, its warmth reaching out like a defiant fist against the bitter cold outside. Anya looked into Lucas's eyes and saw there the same determination that had moved him to speak up the day at the train station. It gave her strength even as fear churned in her stomach. What will we do? She asked softly. Lucas stood, his shadow tall against the cabin wall. We fight, he said simply. With everything we have. I won't lose you, Anya. Not to Kincaid. Not to anyone. The flames danced higher, matching the fire in Lucas's eyes. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the first hints of another storm. But inside the cabin, husband and wife drew closer together, bracing against the gathering storm of man's making that threatened to tear them apart. Dawn broke pale and cold over the mountain cabin. Lucas pulled on his heavy coat, checking his rifle and ammunition before heading to the door. Anya stood near the hearth, her shawl wrapped tight against the morning chill. I have to ride out, Lucas said, his breath frosting in the air. Need to gather folk who'll stand with us. Jim Taylor, the preacher. Anyone who'll testify our marriage is real. He paused, touching her cheek gently. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. Anya nodded, fighting back tears. Be careful, she whispered. After Lucas rode away, Anya cleared the breakfast dishes with trembling hands. The cabin felt emptier than ever before. She retrieved her worn prayer book from the shelf, settling at the rough wooden table. The pages fell open to familiar passages, spots worn smooth by years of desperate fingers seeking comfort. Lord, she murmured, give us strength. Keep him safe. Show us the way through this trial. Hours crept by like molasses in winter. The sun climbed higher, casting bars of light through the cabin's small windows. Anya had just put the kettle on when she heard horses approaching, too many to be Lucas returning. Her heart jumped to her throat. She grabbed Lucas's spare rifle from above the door, just as he'd taught her. But before she could brace herself, the door splintered inward. 3 men burst through, guns drawn. Come quiet now, Missy, the tallest one drawled. She recognized him as one of Kincaid's ranch hands. Got orders to bring you to town. This is my home, Anya said, her voice stronger than she felt. I'm Lucas Boone's lawful wife. Ain't lawful no more, another man sneered. Judge done said so. Now come along peaceful-like, or we'll have to get rough. Anya raised the rifle, but her hands shook. The first man lunged forward, knocking it from her grip. She fought as they grabbed her arms, kicking and twisting, but they were too strong. They dragged her outside into the bitter cold, her boots leaving desperate furrows in the snow. My things, she gasped. Please, at least let me pack. One of the men grabbed her carpet bag, roughly stuffing a few items inside before tossing it aside in the yard. They forced her into a waiting wagon, binding her hands with rough rope. As they pulled away, Anya caught a last glimpse of the cabin. Door hanging broken, her prayer book lying fallen in the snow. The journey to town was brutal. The wagon jolted over frozen ruts, each bump sending pain through Anya's shoulders. The men ignored her completely, speaking only to urge the horses faster. By the time they reached town, the sun was high and her fingers had gone numb with cold. They marched her straight to the jailhouse past staring townspeople who quickly looked away. The heavy iron door clanged shut behind her, leaving her alone in a bare cell with only a wooden bench and thin blanket. Marshal Dorsey appeared a few minutes later, looking uncomfortable. "Miss O'Rourke," he said, refusing to use her married name. "I'm just following orders here." Judge's ruling was clear. "The judge was bought," Anya said bitterly. "You know that, Marshal. You know this isn't right." Dorsey shifted his feet. "Ain't my place to question the law, ma'am. Train comes tomorrow morning. You'll be on it, headed back east where you belong." He left her then, his boots echoing down the corridor. Anya sank onto the hard bench, wrapping her arms around herself. The cell was frigid, winter air seeping through the small barred window. Tears leaked from her eyes, freezing on her cheeks before they could fall. "Our Father," she whispered, voice breaking, "who art in heaven." The familiar words brought little comfort, but she clung to them like a drowning woman to driftwood. Outside she could hear the town coming alive with preparation. Wagons rattled past, voices called out about tomorrow's train schedule. Someone was hammering nearby, the sound driving spikes of despair deeper into her heart. How had everything gone so wrong? Just yesterday morning she'd woken in her own bed, beside her own hearth, with the man she'd grown to love nearby. The afternoon light faded quickly, as it does in mountain winters. Shadows lengthened across the cell floor while Anya huddled on her bench. Someone brought her a tin cup of water and hard bread, but she couldn't eat. Her thoughts were with Lucas, praying he'd return safely to the cabin, praying harder he wouldn't do anything rash when he found her gone. Miles away, Lucas was already spurring his horse through deepening snow. He'd spent the day gathering supporters, the preacher who'd married them, 3 families whose children Anya had nursed, even old Jim Taylor who'd bring others. But when he crested the last ridge before home, he knew something was wrong. The cabin door stood open, swinging in the wind. No smoke rose from the chimney. His horse's hooves thundered across the yard as his heart turned to ice. Inside, the cabin was ransacked, chairs overturned, Anya's shawl trampled on the floor. Her prayer book lay face down in the snow outside, its pages wet and crumpling. Lucas roared with fury, the sound echoing off the mountain walls. He found the tracks easily, wagon wheels and multiple horses heading toward town. Without hesitation, he swung back into his saddle. His horse was tired, but Lucas knew every trail and shortcut through these mountains. He'd ride all night if he had to. The moon rose full and bright as Lucas pressed on, taking deer paths and forgotten logging tracks. His breath came in steaming clouds, his hands clenched tight on the reins. Every moment that passed was another moment Anya spent alone and afraid. He'd failed to protect her once at the cabin. He wouldn't fail her again. In her cell, Anya watched that same moon through her barred window. The jailhouse had grown quiet, with only the occasional creak of floorboards as the guard made his rounds. The temperature had dropped sharply after sunset, and she couldn't stop shivering. She thought of Lucas finding the empty cabin, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Would he know where to look? Would he come for her? And even if he did, what could one man do against the force of corrupt law? "Please," she prayed into the darkness, "please don't let it end like this." Outside, the town settled into uneasy sleep. Tomorrow's train would arrive at 10 o'clock, they said. 10 o'clock to destroy everything she and Lucas had built together. 10 o'clock to tear her from the only real home she'd known since leaving Ireland. Through the forests and valleys, Lucas rode on. The moon cast sharp shadows across the snow, turning the familiar landscape into something alien and threatening. But he knew these mountains like he knew his own heart, and both were telling him the same thing: hurry, hurry, hurry. His horse's hooves struck sparks from frozen stones as they descended toward the sleeping town. Lucas's fury burned hot enough to melt the winter itself, but he forced himself to think clearly. Anya needed more than just anger now. She needed a plan, and help, and the courage to stand against not just Kincaid, but the very law itself. The temperature continued to drop as midnight approached. In her cell, Anya pulled the thin blanket tighter, trying to remember the warmth of their cabin hearth. She whispered prayers into the darkness, her voice growing hoarse with cold and fear. Each creak of the building made her start, hoping against hope it might be Lucas, knowing it was just the winter wind working at the timbers. The guard's boots clumped past again, regular as a clock marking time toward morning, toward that waiting train, toward the end of everything she'd come to love. Dawn crept over the mountains, painting the jail's barred windows with weak gray light. Anya sat huddled on her bench, stiff from cold and lack of sleep. Her prayers had turned to whispers through the long night, hope fading like stars at sunrise. Heavy boots echoed down the corridor. Keys jangled and the cell door groaned open. 2 deputies stood there, faces hard as winter stone. "Time to go, miss," the taller one said. "Train's due in 2 hours." Anya rose shakily, her legs nearly numb. "Please," she said, voice hoarse from the cold night. "I'm innocent of any wrongdoing. I'm Lucas Boone's lawful wife." The deputies exchanged glances but said nothing. One took her arm, not roughly but firmly enough to show resistance would be futile. They led her out into the corridor, past empty cells that seemed to mock her with their silence. Outside, the street was already filling with townsfolk. Some had come just to watch, others to whisper and point. Anya kept her head high, though her cheeks burned with shame. The morning air bit through her thin dress. They hadn't even let her take a coat from the cabin. "Look at her," someone muttered. "Ain't right what they're doing." "Hush now," another voice answered. "Ain't our business." Marshal Dorsey stood by his office door, watching with troubled eyes as they brought Anya out. His badge caught the early light, glinting like a cold star on his chest. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then seemed to think better of it. Suddenly, hoofbeats thundered down the street. A horse appeared through the morning mist, mud spattered and heaving. Its rider sat tall in the saddle, face dark with fury. "Lucas!" Anya's heart leaped at the sight of him. Lucas Boone swung down from his horse, boots striking the packed earth with purpose. His clothes were travel-stained, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes blazed as he strode toward them. "Let her go," he demanded, voice carrying across the growing crowd. "She's my wife, and you've no right to hold her." Marshal Dorsey stepped forward, hand resting near his gun. "Got a judge's order, says different, Boone. Says your marriage ain't valid. Says she's to be deported on today's train." "That order's built on lies," Lucas growled. He didn't reach for a weapon, though his hands clenched at his sides. Instead, he turned to face the gathering townspeople. "And I've brought witnesses to prove it." From the edge of the crowd, movement stirred. 3 figures stepped forward, members of the nearby Ute settlement, dignified in their bearing. The eldest, Grey Wolf, spoke in careful English. "The spring on Boone's land," he said, "has been shared water since before my father's time. We have agreement, our people and Boone family. He honors old ways, keeps peace." His dark eyes found Kincaid in the crowd. "Not like others who would steal what is not theirs." Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. More people stepped forward. Martha Collins, whose son Anya had nursed through fever, and Tom Wilson, whose wife she'd helped with a difficult birth. "That girl's got healing in her hands," Martha declared. "Saved my Tommy when no one else could help. Spent 3 nights by his bedside, praying and tending him. That ain't the action of someone who means harm. She helped birth my Sarah Jane," Tom added, "didn't ask nothing in return neither. Just gave what help she could." The preacher pushed through the crowd then, his collar stark white against his black coat. "I married these 2, he announced, voice ringing with authority. "Did it proper and legal before God and witnesses. And I've watched them these months since, seen how they've built a life together, attended services faithful as any couple." He turned to face Henry Kincaid, who stood scowling at the edge of the crowd. "What I ain't seen is any evidence of fraud or wrongdoing. What I have seen is a powerful man trying to break what God has joined for nothing but greed and spite." The crowd's mood was shifting now, like wind changing direction before a storm. People who'd been watching silently began to nod, to murmur agreement. Even some of Kincaid's usual supporters looked uncomfortable. "This is nonsense," Kincaid blustered, pushing forward. "That marriage was a sham, done only to spite me." The judge agreed. "The judge you paid off?" someone called from the crowd. "Everyone knows you've been after that spring water, Kincaid." Lucas moved to stand beside Anya, his shoulder touching hers. She felt strength flow into her at his presence, at the warm solidity of him after the long, cold night. "She is my wife," Lucas declared again, voice steady and clear in the morning air. And no man, not Kincaid, not any judge he's bought, will send her away. This is her home now. Our home. The marshal shifted his weight, looking increasingly uncertain. More townspeople were stepping forward now, adding their voices to the defense. The girl's done nothing wrong, and Kincaid's the one ought to be ashamed. Let them be, Marshal. Ain't right to separate them. Kincaid's face had gone red with rage. You can't just ignore a judge's order, Dorsey. Do your duty. But the marshal was studying the crowd, reading the change in the wind. His hand moved away from his gun. Way I see it, he said slowly. We got a whole town full of witnesses saying this marriage is proper and true. Got tribal leaders vouching for Boone's character. Got the preacher himself standing behind it. He shook his head. Maybe that judge ought to hear all this testimony before making final decisions. You'll regret this, Kincaid snarled. But his words lacked force now. The crowd had turned against him, and he knew it. Lucas's arm slipped around Anya's shoulders, drawing her close. She leaned into him, trembling with relief and exhaustion. The deputies who'd been holding her stepped back, no longer certain of their role. The deportation's halted, Marshal Dorsey announced, least until we can get a proper hearing with all witnesses present. He nodded to Lucas and Anya. You're free to go home. The crowd broke into scattered applause and calls of approval. Anya felt tears spring to her eyes, not of shame this time, but of gratitude and joy. Lucas held her steady as townspeople came forward to offer congratulations and support. The sun had fully risen now, burning away the morning mist. Kincaid stormed away, his boots kicking up dust, but few even noticed his departure. The gathered people were too busy welcoming Anya properly into their community, at last. Martha Collins brought a warm shawl to wrap around Anya's shoulders. The preacher spoke quiet words of blessing. Even Grey Wolf and his companions came forward to clasp hands with Lucas and nod respectfully to Anya. Let's go home, Lucas murmured finally, just for her ears. You need rest and warmth. Anya nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. Lucas helped her mount his horse, then swung up behind her. As they rode out of town, she heard the whistle of the arriving train, the train that had meant to carry her away from everything she loved. Instead, she was heading home secured in her husband's arms, finally and truly accepted as Lucas Boone's wife. The courthouse buzzed with tension as Judge Whitaker adjusted his spectacles, glaring down from the bench. His usual air of authority wavered as witness after witness stepped forward. Nathaniel Redhawk spoke first, his quiet dignity filling the room. Our people have shared water rights with Lucas Boone for many seasons. He honors the old agreements, treats the land and its people with respect. More testimonies followed, mothers telling of Anya's healing hands, farmers praising Lucas's fair dealings, the preacher defending their marriage's legitimacy. The judge shifted uncomfortably, his confident demeanor cracking. Henry Kincaid surged to his feet. This is absurd, I demand. You'll demand nothing, Judge Whitaker cut in, his face flushed. The evidence before me. He paused, clearing his throat. It appears I was misled regarding certain facts. His eyes darted to Kincaid, then away. I hereby reverse my previous ruling. The marriage of Lucas and Anya Boone stands valid and binding. The courthouse erupted in cheers. Kincaid's face turned scarlet. You'll regret this, he shouted, but townsfolk closed ranks, forcing him toward the door. He retreated, cursing, into the street. Anya's legs gave way as relief flooded through her. Lucas caught her, strong arms holding her close. Tears streamed down her face as their neighbors surrounded them with congratulations. Later that evening, they sat before their cabin's hearth sharing a simple supper of cornbread and stew. The familiar crackle of the fire wrapped them in comfort. Lucas reached across the table, taking her hand. Anya, he said softly, I reckon you should know. I love you. Not just as my wife, but with all my heart. She blushed, squeezing his fingers. I love you too, Lucas, more than I ever thought possible. The firelight danced across their faces as they began talking of spring planting and new rooms to add to the cabin, dreams of a future now secure in their shared love. Spring crept into the mountains like a gentle whisper. The melting snow revealed patches of earth where purple and yellow wildflowers pushed through the soil. Lucas and Anya worked side by side, replacing worn shingles on the cabin roof, their movements falling into an easy rhythm. Behind the cabin, they turned fresh soil for their first garden. Mrs. Thompson from town brought turnip seeds, while the Cooper family offered potato eyes for planting. "These mountain-hardy vegetables," they explained, sharing knowing smiles with Anya. On warm afternoons, children from the orphanage would venture up the trail, drawn by the smell of fresh bread. Anya's heart melted at their thin faces, and she always had extra loaves ready. Their delighted grins as they bit into warm slices made her eyes shine with joy. Sundays became a time of fellowship rather than isolation. The church pews around them filled with friendly faces. The Coopers, the Thompsons, even some of the Ute families who traded with Lucas. After services, neighbors lingered to chat, sharing news and arranging visits. Lucas maintained his principle of sharing the spring water freely. When Kincaid's men came demanding access rights, Lucas stood firm. "Water's meant for sharing," he'd say, "not for profit." The townspeople backed him, remembering Kincaid's cruelty. One peaceful evening, as purple shadows stretched across the valley, Anya sat in her rocking chair by the fire. Her clear voice carried the ancient words of Psalms through the cabin while Lucas listened, whittling a toy horse for one of the orphans. His face, once hardened by solitude, had softened with contentment. "Maybe we could take in some of those children," Anya suggested softly, closing her Bible. "Add rooms here. Make this a real home for those who need one." Lucas nodded, his eyes warm. "Reckon we could. Plenty of love to share now." Their quiet laughter mixed with the crackling fire, filling the once lonely cabin with the sound of family and hope. Autumn painted the mountains in amber and gold as smoke curled from the expanded cabin's chimney. What was once a single room had grown into a proper home, with new walls and rooms built by willing hands from town. The sound of children's laughter echoed through the valley where silence once ruled. Anya pulled a fresh loaf from the oven, its rich aroma filling the kitchen. Through the window, she watched Lucas splitting wood, his steady rhythm matching the beating of her grateful heart. Their weekly Sunday supper had become a cherished tradition in the community. Soon the cabin filled with familiar faces. 3 orphans who now called this place home, the Thompson family bearing fresh vegetables, and 2 weary travelers who had heard tales of mountain hospitality. The long table, crafted by Lucas himself, groaned under bowls of stew and platters of golden bread. "Pass the potatoes, please," young Tommy called out, his once shy voice now confident and strong. Beside him, Sarah and Mary giggled over some private jest, their eyes bright with belonging. The meal buzzed with warm conversation and easy laughter. Even the travelers, initially reserved, soon joined in the family-like atmosphere. Through the window, they could see the spring flowing freely, its waters nurturing gardens throughout the valley. Kincaid's mansion stood empty on the distant hill, its owner now avoiding the town he once ruled. As evening settled and the last guest waved goodbye, Lucas and Anya settled onto the porch. Stars began emerging above the ridges, diamonds scattered across deepening blue. The autumn air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke. Lucas squeezed Anya's hand gently. Who would have thought, he mused, his voice soft with wonder. That day at the train station would lead to all this. Anya leaned against his shoulder, remembering the burning shame of rejection transformed into such abundant blessing. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," she whispered, her Irish lilt warm with gratitude. "He turned our sorrow into such joy." Behind them, lamplight spilled through the cabin windows, casting golden squares on the packed earth of the yard. Inside, evidence of their shared life filled every corner. Children's drawings tacked to walls, well-worn books or scripture, handmade quilts, and the constant aroma of fresh-baked bread. What had begun as a marriage of desperate convenience had blossomed into a legacy of love that touched countless lives on the mountain. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.